Imagine this. A successful black CEO walks confidently toward her own office building, the place she built with her hard work. Yet the moment she enters, she is stopped at the door and treated like she doesn't belong, told coldly to wait outside as if she were invisible. As if her achievements and authority had no value, and in that single instant the air grows heavy with disrespect and injustice. But she does not protest. She does not reveal who she is. Instead, she stays calm, quietly allowing the insult to unfold. And while the guards and staff feel proud of their false authority, they have no idea that the woman they just dismissed holds the power to decide their future. They have no idea that every second ticking by brings them closer to a shocking twist. A twist of revenge, a twist of truth. And when it finally comes, no one in that room will ever forget it. She was not an ordinary leader. She was a woman who had built her empire from the ground up. A black CEO whose intelligence, strength, and determination had turned small beginnings into a company that people admired. And as she walked toward her office that morning, her presence alone carried authority. Her calm steps showed confidence. Her eyes carried focus. And her silence carried power. Yet beneath that calm exterior lived a fire that refused to be disrespected. She had faced prejudice before. She had faced doubters who never believed in her abilities. But she had defeated every one of them with success louder than their insults. Now she entered the building ready for a new day, unaware that a moment of arrogance from others would test her patience and create a scene that no one would ever forget. A scene of injustice, a scene of silent revenge, and a shocking power twist waiting to explode. As she stepped through the glass doors of the company she built with her own hands, her calm and steady walk carried the quiet pride of someone who had conquered battles most could never imagine. Yet in the very place where her name was carved into the walls and her vision shaped every corner, she was met not with respect, but with suspicion. For the security guard standing tall by the entrance narrowed his eyes at her, as though she were an intruder. His voice sharp and dismissive when he asked her where she thought she was going. She replied with the same calm tone she always carried. But before she could take another step, his hand rose to block her path, and in that moment, the air grew tense. The receptionist looked up, whispering something under her breath, glancing at her with a mixture of doubt and disdain. And then came the words that sliced through the air like a blade, the words that revealed the depth of ignorance hiding beneath their uniforms. He told her to wait outside, to stand as if she were a visitor, a stranger, someone without authority. And the receptionist joined in, her tone cold, as if giving orders to someone beneath her, unaware that the woman in front of them was the very heartbeat of the company, the one who signed their checks, the one whose vision paid for the lights above their heads. Yet they treated her as though her skin color and her silence stripped away her right to belong. The humiliation was sharp, the injustice unbearable. But she did not let it show. She did not raise her voice. She did not reveal her title. She simply stood there, her eyes steady, her mind recording every second of their arrogance. And while they smirked and moved on with their tasks, convinced that they had put her in her place, she stood quietly, holding back the storm that was building inside her. For she knew patience was the sharpest weapon. She knew that 7 minutes of silence would echo louder than any argument. She knew that the real blow was not in proving herself at the door, but in showing them who she truly was at the right moment. And so she waited, her calm presence masking the rage, the unfairness of being judged not by her achievements, but by the color of her skin, not by her authority, but by shallow assumptions. And as every second passed, suspense thickened like smoke, because the very people who had dismissed her would soon sit in the boardroom, waiting for their leader, not knowing that the leader was already in front of them, standing silently outside, preparing to turn their careless insult into the most unforgettable lesson of their lives, a lesson that would shatter their arrogance, expose their prejudice, and flip the power balance in a way that would leave them trembling. She stood still, her hands resting calmly by her side, her face carrying no anger, no panic, no visible reaction to the insult she had just received. And in that silence was a strength far greater than any loud protest could have carried. Because while they believed they had reduced her to nothing more than an outsider, she was already calculating the weight of their mistake, already planning how that arrogance would collapse on them within moments. Yet outwardly, she gave them nothing but quiet compliance, waiting exactly where they told her to wait, allowing them to believe they had control, allowing them to feel superior. And the more they ignored her, the more their confidence grew. The receptionist turned back to her desk with a dismissive glance, whispering to a colleague about how some people always tried to walk in without permission. The guard leaned casually against the doorframe, his voice echoing with the comfort of authority, never realizing that his words would soon replay in his mind with shame, because his target was not a stranger, but the very leader of the empire he thought he was protecting. And while minutes slipped by, she never fidgeted, never asked questions, never tried to prove herself. Instead, she let the room grow heavy with their ignorance. knowing that true revenge is never rushed, true power never needs to shout. It only needs the perfect moment to strike. And in those 7 long minutes she embraced the silence like a weapon, a silence that carried every ounce of history. Every injustice faced by people like her who were judged before being known. And though the wound of disrespect burned inside her, she knew patience would turn that wound into a blade sharp enough to cut through their arrogance. The suspense built like a drumbeat, every second ticking louder than the last. And while they sat in their false comfort believing they had put her in her place, she was steady, unshaken, waiting for the boardroom to fill with the same people who had just dismissed her, waiting for the moment when her footsteps would no longer be those of a visitor, but of the highest authority in the building. And when that moment arrived, their comfort would shatter like glass. Their ignorance would be exposed in front of everyone, and the silence she chose now would explode into a shocking twist they could never forget. A twist that would flip the entire power dynamic in a single breath, leaving them with nothing but regret and the haunting memory of how they told their own CEO to wait outside. 7 minutes slipped away like an eternity, and with each passing second the weight of her silence grew heavier, until finally she decided the moment had arrived, her calm footsteps echoing against the polished floor as she moved forward with quiet authority. The guard at the door straightened in surprise, his confidence flickering for the first time when he saw her walk past without hesitation. The receptionist's voice rose in protest, trying to remind her that she had been told to wait, but the woman did not pause. She did not answer. She did not even turn her head. She simply continued walking with the kind of composure only true power carries, and within seconds she reached the boardroom, the very heart of the company, where the staff, the managers, and the so-called gatekeepers were already seated, speaking casually, waiting for the meeting to begin, their laughter filling the room until the doors opened wide and silence fell like a storm. All eyes turned to her, and in that single moment the atmosphere shifted. Recognition spread slowly across their faces, shock washing over them as they realized who had just entered. The woman they had dismissed, the woman they had ordered to wait outside, was in fact the very leader they were all waiting for. The black CEO whose vision kept the company alive, the authority whose signature controlled their futures. And as she took her seat at the head of the table, the reality struck them like lightning. The receptionist's face drained of color. The guard froze in the doorway. The managers exchanged uneasy glances, and not a single word dared to break the silence. For the truth had revealed itself with a force more powerful than any argument. Their ignorance had been exposed in front of everyone. Their arrogance shattered in an instant. And all they could do was sit in disbelief while she adjusted her chair, placed her papers on the table and lifted her gaze, her calm eyes scanning the room, letting the silence punish them more than words ever could. Because this was the moment where power revealed its truest form, quiet, undeniable, and absolute. And the ones who thought they had control only minutes ago were now trembling under the weight of their mistake, realizing that they had insulted the very woman who held the authority to decide whether they stayed or left. And though no words had been spoken yet, the suspense was unbearable, for everyone knew what was coming next. A reckoning that would not be delayed. A shocking twist that would transform their arrogance into regret and their comfort into fear. And all of it delivered by the same woman they had underestimated. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her presence filling the room without the need for raised voices or dramatic gestures. The weight of silence pressing down on every person who had witnessed what had just happened. And then, in a voice calm yet razor-sharp, she spoke the words that cut deeper than any shout ever could. She said slowly, clearly, and without hesitation, "You told your own CEO to wait outside." The sentence echoed across the boardroom like thunder. The guard at the door dropped his gaze to the floor. The receptionist froze with her mouth slightly open. The managers who had once been whispering nervously now sat rigid in their seats, unable to meet her eyes. Every face in the room dropped as the truth carved its way into their pride. Because nothing could undo what they had done. No excuse could erase the fact that they had disrespected the very leader they served. She let the silence linger after her words, making them feel the sting of every second. And the longer she remained quiet, the heavier the shame grew. It was not anger that terrified them. It was her composure, the way she carried herself with authority so natural, so absolute that no one dared to move. And while their thoughts scrambled for a defense, she remained still, allowing their fear to deepen. Then she leaned forward, her eyes sweeping across the table, her tone steady, not a single word wasted. She explained how prejudice blinds judgment, how arrogance leads to downfall, and how respect is not optional but essential in a place where unity builds success. Every sentence landed with precision, every pause pierced like a blade. And though her words were controlled, the message behind them carried the weight of revenge, a reminder that power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper can be far more devastating. The staff sat motionless, their pride crumbling, their false confidence destroyed, because they understood they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She had turned their insult into her weapon. She had exposed their ignorance in front of everyone without raising her voice. And now they sat powerless, stripped of the authority they thought they had, waiting, dreading, wondering what her next move would be. The suspense thickened with every second, because her calm demeanor promised something far more dangerous than an outburst. It promised a reckoning that none of them could stop. And though she had spoken only one line that revealed the truth, that single line carried the strength of every battle she had ever fought, every injustice she had ever endured, and now it stood as a declaration that the days of dismissing her, or anyone like her, were over, and the room held its breath, knowing the real blow was yet to come. The silence after her words was so heavy it felt as if the entire building had stopped breathing. And then, with the same calm authority that had unsettled them all, she leaned forward, her voice firm, her decision final. She announced that the guard who had blocked her and the receptionist who had mocked her no longer had a place in her company. The statement landed like a hammer on stone, cracking the false confidence that had filled the room only minutes ago. The guard's eyes widened as if he had heard wrong. The receptionist's lips trembled as she tried to form a protest, but no sound came out, and the rest of the staff sat frozen, too shocked to move, because the very woman they had underestimated had just shifted the balance of power in an instant. The same hands that had dismissed her now trembled under the weight of her decision, and no one dared to interfere. The dismissal was not shouted. It was not delivered with anger. It was delivered with the kind of cold precision that leaves no room for argument. She explained that in her company there was no space for prejudice, no space for arrogance disguised as authority, no space for those who believed respect could be given selectively. And as she spoke, her words carried not only the power of a leader, but the revenge of someone who had been forced to endure one humiliation too many. The silence in the room deepened, every person realizing that they had just witnessed a moment they would never forget. The shocking twist no one expected. The staff looked down at their notes, at their hands, at anything but her face, because to meet her eyes was to face the truth of their own complicity. She signed the termination orders without hesitation, her pen gliding across the paper with steady control. And in that simple action, the fate of those who had disrespected her was sealed. The guard shifted nervously. The receptionist swallowed hard, and both knew there was no saving themselves, no excuse that could undo what had been done. She had taken their arrogance and turned it into their downfall. And the room understood that this was not just punishment. This was a message, a declaration that her silence had never been weakness but strategy, a weapon sharper than any outburst could ever be. The staff remained still, the shock wrapping around them like chains. The power that once seemed to belong to others now revealed itself to be entirely in her hands. And in that moment the truth became undeniable. The one they had told to wait outside was the one who had the power to send them outside permanently. The reversal was complete, and the fear in the room proved that the lesson had been learned the hard way. Respect is not a choice. It is the foundation on which everything stands, and when it is denied, the consequences are swift and unforgettable. The room remained frozen long after her words had fallen silent, the weight of what had happened pressing into every corner, and as she stood to leave, her presence carried a final reminder that respect is not something to be granted only when convenient. It is something owed to every human being, regardless of skin color, gender, or appearance, because the very person dismissed as unworthy may hold the power to shape destinies, the power to decide who stays and who goes. And that morning proved it with ruthless clarity. The employees had learned that arrogance built on prejudice collapses the moment truth walks through the door. They had tried to strip her of dignity, yet in the end, she stripped them of their positions. She walked out of that boardroom calm and unshaken, while those left behind were chained to the memory of their mistake, a memory that would haunt them forever, a lesson carved in silence and revealed with power.